You ever get the idea that over the last year and a bit, was it 15, 16 months, that the universe has been trying to tell us something, sending us a message? That's the feeling I've been getting quite a bit just recently with this global pandemic that we still currently have, because it's far from over. And it's going to be a while for it to disappear completely, if at all, and many experts are saying it's always going to be around, just like the flu is, and we'll have to deal with that, because that's going to be the way of life. But you know, there are other pandemics that we've had and epidemics we've had throughout the 20th and into the 21st century, and I feel when I look back on them now, they're all kind of wake-up calls telling us we need to do something. But what is that something? What are we supposed to be doing? That's what I want to kind of look at today in this particular episode, to see, where are we going? How will we re-emerge from this particular course that we're on at the moment? Hi, I'm Jeremy Scott. Welcome to the Re-Emerging Earth podcast. Now, back in early 20th century, just after the First Great War, we had the Spanish flu, and that's reported to have killed more than 50 million people globally. So it wasn't just confined to one particular area, such as Spain, for example. It was only called the Spanish flu because that's where it originated from, or that's where they reckon it originated from. But it hit many places all around the world, very much like COVID is doing now with this particular strain of COVID, this COVID-19. But the Spanish flu, why it was so lethal, you could say, was because it mutated. Wherever it went, wherever treatments were given it, somewhere there'd be a new variant. And no matter how you treated that, another new variant would spring up. And that's a very familiar story to what's happening today with all the different vaccinations, but all the different variants that are popping out all over the place. This virus is mutating because it wants to survive. I may be wrong, but I think in the end the Spanish flu kind of mutated itself out of existence, because it got weaker and weaker each time it mutated, because obviously the advances in medicine and so on help with that as well. And that could be the case with COVID for all we know. In a few years' time, or even less, that situation will also be there, where the vaccines, the different vaccines or whatever, and the different tweaks they make to the different kinds of vaccines will help to bring a very strong vaccination or immunization program. Or I hesitate to use immunization, because you're not actually immune from the COVID. Even if you have all the doses, there's still a chance you'll get it, so you're not immune. And by that I mean, even when you get it, you still fall ill. Because like the flu vaccine, you're not immunized against the flu. People have the vaccine, whatever, the flu jab every year, and still get the flu. It just isn't as lethal as it could be for some people, especially if they've got underlying health issues. So, with all these different variants that are going around with COVID, it's causing a lot of pressure for governments, because one new variant springs up, because it's so virulent, they close everything down. Then when that kind of slows down, they open things up, another new variant pops up, and they close everything down again. So it's a bit like a seesaw in some ways, but certainly up and down a lot. And people obviously are getting a little bit tense about that, and they're getting fed up with it. And it's not very good on the mental side for many people either. So what's the answer? Do we just let it go? Let these mutations mutate? Perhaps. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert in the medical field, so I wouldn't be able to give you that kind of advice. But perhaps we would, as some do believe, end up with a kind of herd immunity. But what then? How do we come out of this then? How do we re-emerge? What lessons do we have to learn from being in this situation in the first place? What is the universe trying to tell us? I believe it's leading up to a much greater time that is perhaps on its way to us sometime in the future. I believe it may have a connection to also the climate situation that we're in, not so much enjoying, but that's being all the rage at the moment at different conferences and summits amongst governments, and lots of buzzwords about decreasing this and carbon emission that being created. I think it's got something to do with that as well. Yeah, and as I've mentioned before, I mean, I'm someone who's studied the Bible a lot, and certainly in that Bible, in the book of Revelation, for example, with John had his dream, his visions, there were a lot of plagues announced before the final one, if you like. Yeah, and that could be what we're building up to, that final cataclysm. And it's not as if we haven't been here before. Many scientists, if not most, agree that we are going through a period in time which they classify as the Sixth Mass Extinction. So, if this is the sixth, then there must have been 5 before that. And there certainly was. The last one would be, was it around 65 million years ago, that it wiped out the dinosaurs. And I think it's somewhere, depending on who you listen to, somewhere between 80% to 95% of all living things on the planet at the same time. Especially when it came to animals and insects and certain plants and so on. But, as we know, the Earth has bounced back, hasn't it? It's re-emerged. It's renewed itself, it rebirthed. New animals came into existence, new plants and trees and insects and fish and so on, and birds came into existence. And eventually we also made an appearance. Yeah. And then we've moved on over the last millions of years. There is a time coming, I think, where this cycle, this sixth mass extinction, will come to a head. But it's not going to be like 10, 20, 30 years down the road, I don't think. It could be a bit further away from that. So all this talk about global warming and things, and we need to do something, you know, that's not going to really stop it, if I'm being honest. Although I'm not against the idea. Don't get me wrong there. I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything, but certainly we should. I'll get on to that in a moment. However, what I feel is what we do, the little bit that we can do to help cool down the global temperature, to live in a way which is helping the planet to breathe, is certainly going to slow things down. But it's not going to stop this particular cycle. That's still going to happen, and it's going to happen in a massive way. And I feel that we may go through another period, just like the dinosaurs and the 4 other mass extinctions went through. The difference being, if we do things right, we'll have survivors. And that's indicated also in Revelation, where John talks about, the camp where there's a few, and you got the masses outside trying to get into the camp, and the masses are then all burnt up. I think that's the kind of language it says, and those who survive move on into a new earth, new heaven, new earth kind of situation. And I believe that's kind of indicated, because you can't take these things literally. I believe that means that we are going to have survivors, but obviously it's only going to be a small percentage of those who are around either today or at that time, depending on how many are around. I think we're currently, what we at the moment, something like 7 billion, maybe less than 7 billion now, but certainly by that time it could be 10, 15, 20 billion. So it makes you wonder, is the universe telling us that we need to depopulate a little bit? We're getting too populous. That's a thought as well. So when this mass extinction does come, the ones who know, all these experts and that, they reckon that it'll take out over 95% of all life on Earth, including us, if we don't do anything, if we don't prepare. So I feel that throughout the 20th and 21st especially, 20th and 21st centuries especially, the universe, spirit, whatever you want to call it, has been sending us wake-up calls. Come on guys, get your act together. You've got to do something. If you want to survive as a race, you need to do something. You need to act now. Put things into place. Put measures into place so that you can survive as a species when that time comes. So when we re-emerge out of this COVID situation, I feel we need to be seriously looking at ways to ensure our survival in the years to come, maybe in the few decades to come that we have got left for ourselves. Like I said, I don't know how many. There's no date given. There's no way to calculate a date from what John wrote in Revelation or what his vision was. We can only make guesstimates. But we are close, I feel. And many religions believe that as well. I'm not as religious as I used to be, as I've said before, but many religions believe that we are close. And it's not just like Christian religions or Muslim religion or anything like that. It is other religions as well, world religions in general, believe that we are very close to the time when these things will indeed take place. Well, this global warming that we've got now, it's happened before, and it's happened before in the last couple of 100 years, or maybe a bit earlier. Because in more recent history, we had massive heat waves and everything like that, just around about Victorian times or before Victorian times. And during the Victorian time, we had a massive kind of ice age situation, like a mini ice age, where everything was frozen over. So with all this warming up of temperatures and things that are happening right now, it's nothing new. And the scientists who look into these kinds of things, they've said that we've had many of these cycles over the years, over the millennia. They can look back and they can tell from the rocks, they can tell from the vegetation and things like that, that we've experienced these kinds of things many, many times over the millennia. So it's nothing new. The difference is, yes, and I have to agree on this, we've helped to speed it up a little bit over the last couple of 100 years through the Industrial Revolution and things like that. But more so, I would say, during the 20th century, with the build-up to the two world wars, then the exploitation of fossil fuels, the exploitation of digging for precious stones, the oil, and then creating great wastes of land, cutting down the trees and everything for agriculture. The agricultural explosion all contributes to that. Whether it's the beef industry, or whether it's the pork industry, or whether it's the poultry or arable, whatever it happens to be. Then we've got the situation that we've had throughout the mid-20th century with all the herbicides and pesticides that we're spraying. That's poisoned the soil in many places, so whatever grows isn't very edible anyway, not even for animals. And obviously for wildlife and that. And it's created extinctions of different species of animals and birds and insects in different parts of the world. And that's what we can look forward to if we carry on the way we are. That process is going to speed up. And those temperatures that the governments keep talking about at the G7 or the COP meetings, whatever it is, and the scientists keep referring to, are going to continue to rise. However, we are also experiencing extreme weather conditions with the heat waves. I think there's one currently in America, California. And like we saw, last year, all the wildfires in California and in Australia and other parts of the world. The floods, the hurricanes, tsunamis. That isn't all down to us. That's not down to global warming. That's part of that unstoppable climatic change that we're experiencing. And that will continue. That will continue, and it may increase or it may lessen. I think there's going to be like spirals, where there'll be periods where it's going to be quite intense, and there'll be perhaps a spiral over a few years when we'll have a bit of a rebate, or respite I should say, and things will be a lot easier. But certainly the climate is shifting, and it's kind of like going in some ways to the opposite. Obviously we've got like the ice caps and so on melting. That's raising the water levels. Got the seas, the oceans heating up, and that could be partly down to us as well. But I feel, like I said, we're not totally responsible for that. We may play our part in that, but we're not totally responsible for that. I think that mainly comes from the sun itself and our exposure to the earth, to the sun, to the solar flares. They've intensified over the decades. And that's certainly been the case. As large solar flares, there's more intensity there. And that will have an effect on us, all that radiation, all the UV and so on. However, where we play our part is perhaps damaging our atmosphere, our ozone layer and things like that, allowing this intensity to come through in a more intense way, in that sense. So we do have our part to play in that, but we're not totally responsible. So there's no need for these experts and governments and so on to make us feel guilty just so that we will do something, out of guilt. We don't want to do things out of guilt. We want to do things out of love for ourselves and love for our planet, love for our home that we live on. So I do believe, yes, we should be doing things such as dealing with the plastic situation, recycling and things like that, watching what we eat perhaps, maybe changing our diets, or you don't have to change your diet, you just eat less of what you normally would, There's nothing wrong going for burger and chips or fries. You just don't have to do it 2 or 3 times a day, as some people actually do. You don't have to have a takeaway every night. You don't have to have your dinner delivered at home every day, except obviously when you're in a lockdown situation. That's obviously a service which was very valued by many people, especially those who were unable to get out because of shielding the elderly and so on. But now we're starting to re-emerge from that, starting to get back into another way of living, if you say. I won't say normal, because we're not going back to the way we used to live, but getting back into a way of living which may be slightly different, but at least a lot more open than it has been over the last 15, 16 months. For some people, maybe even longer than that. But then we've got to think about how we're going to live. What are we going to do? How are we going to use our vehicles? Are we going to move more towards electric vehicles rather than those that use fossil fuels, like or oil and gasoline and diesel and stuff? Are we going to move away from that? Are we going to use public transport more? If the infrastructure is there. What are we going to eat? Are we going to think about the carbon footprint of the clothing that we wear? Because here in UK, for example, a lot of our clothing, even from top quality companies, comes from the other side of the world, because it's made cheaper there and they can make bigger profits. Perhaps we're going to have a change in that. Let's have more localized production. Yes, we'll probably have to pay more for it, but at least it'll last longer because you look after it better. So there may be changes in that. It's not going to be complete changes. We're still going to shop like that, most likely. We're still going to shop online, but we'll want to still go into stores for the experience, I would say. We'll probably still eat out, eat in, whatever. So there are areas in life that are not going to change. However, we'll be a lot more aware of the impact that what we do has on the earth as a whole. And it's no point in just a few countries doing this and no others doing anything. There's no point in, say, just the Western world doing things. America, UK, Europe and the likes. And maybe other parts of the world not, because they can't maybe afford to, or because of lack of infrastructure and things like that, or because of things happening with the different governments which are corrupt and things like that. We all need to be pulling together in this, and this is why obviously we have conferences like COP26, I think, is coming up in September at the time of recording, 2021, and I believe it's going to be held in Edinburgh, so Scotland, which obviously is part of UK, at least at the moment. As I speak, at the time of recording, who knows what will happen in the next few years. Anyway, but digress a little bit there. Yeah, the awareness that we have, and that is something that became very apparent during the last year and a bit, year and a half, say, for talk's sake. During the pandemic period, the lockdowns, how peaceful it was, how nature thrived when we weren't destroying it, how the air smelt even because there's no car fumes or vehicle fumes. How nature reclaimed areas even because we weren't there to disturb that. And how many wildlife species came back from either near extinction or even total extinction. I was watching a nature program, last week I think it was, and they were talking about storks here in UK. They hadn't been seen in the UK for, I don't know, 100 or more years, couple of 100 years, 300 years, something like that. And they found a nesting pair. And they would normally come from Europe, but we were here in the UK perhaps at the most northern tip of their sort of migratory path. But we used to have storks here in the UK until they were hunted out, like many of the other things that they did in the Middle Ages and things. Many animals and creatures, they hunted them for food or for their fur or whatever. But I'm getting away from the topic. A lot of these species have come back. Insects as well have started to make a reappearance, and they're starting to thrive. The bees are starting to thrive, and they certainly did over the last year, and that's because they weren't being disturbed. Their habitats were being recreated in many ways. And there's moves afoot to do that on a lot of farmland here in UK. I don't know what it's like in other countries, I can't speak for them, but certainly here in UK, a lot of farms, and the government's incentivizing this, giving them some kind of an incentive, that's it, to do this, to leave either whole fields or tracts of fields just for meadowland, to encourage the wildlife back in, to encourage the different flowers, then the insects and the bees and the birds, all that will follow. And it's to encourage that. And that's to help with that's all part of the green incentive, the green environmental project that the government has here in the UK. I'm sure other countries are probably doing the same thing. So there are things that we can do in that sense to help us prepare for what may be coming up at some point in our future when this climate cycle finally does come to an end. We can slow things down by taking care of our local environment, the environment on a larger scale, even our internal environment with what we eat and how we look after our bodies. And in that way, that will give us a breathing space to prepare for the time ahead so that we will be able to survive as a species. We'll have new technologies and things like that which will help us maybe be able to create different habitats in each country to help us survive the onslaught of the cataclysmic end of this system that we live in right now. I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but what I'm about is how we will emerge out of this, not only this situation that we're going through right now, but how we will emerge or re-emerge as a species on this planet when the climate finally comes to an end, in the sense of the cataclysmic end that's been forecast, the Sixth Mass Extinction. How are we going to rebuild our lives? And we do have places like seed banks and animal places, where they're storing their DNA so they can create clones and things like that. And they've got all these data banks of fauna, of seeds, of animals, even us, to that degree. Places like Kew Gardens and other places all around the world where animals that were once extinct or whatever, they've got the DNA, or plants and so on that are no longer around, they've got the seeds, and they're kind of like frozen in time, so to speak. So we'll be able to reintroduce those into the new earth when that time comes. And I feel that's how we're going to do that. But in the meantime, we need to do more. We need to prepare more for that. And to face up to the fact that as many millions have died because of COVID. Tens of millions have died because of Spanish flu. And I think it's maybe hundreds of millions have died, I think, maybe of COVID. 300 to 400 million, something like that. And it could increase. We've got to face up to the fact that in time there's going to be a lot more. And we need to be prepared for that. Rather later than sooner. As in, for when it happens, we want to be prepared so that it happens later rather than sooner. We don't want to bring it upon ourselves too early, which is why all these green initiatives and living in a more greener environment, a more we call it sustainable kind of environment, sustainable farming and things like that, all need to be looked at and examined and implemented where possible so that we can re-emerge not only out of this particular cycle that we're going through, but also so we can re-emerge as a species and survive into the next phase when this sixth cycle that we're going through comes to an end. So with that happy thought, I'm going to leave it there. I thank you so much for listening, and I appreciate any comments you have. Let me know. But I enjoy talking about things like this. I look upon it as like a wake-up call, if you like. And whether you take it as that or whether you think I'm talking out of my orifice, it's up to you. It's your choice. I'm just putting my thoughts out there. Invite some discussion about it. Anyway, guys, that's it for this time. As always, fantastic to speak with you. I look forward to the next time. Bye now.